Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, together with my co-host, Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service, jbstechphilly.com, and now columnist for the Jewish Press.
I'm having a lot of fun doing all three assignments, and in the Jewish Press, my column is called Albany Beat, and I talk about how government relates to the Jewish community, or doesn't, as the case may be. And right now with us today is our guest, who's Jewish and a member of government, a member of the legislature, Phil Steck, Assemblyman from the Albany, from Colonie and Schenectady County areas. So welcome back to the Jewish View.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so tell us, what was the session like in your view? How do you
Give it a report card.
Well, we tend to think of session as it relates to our own particular district. It was an outstanding year for the 110th Assembly District. My district, which is Colonie, Niskayuna, and the city of Schenectady, is very interested in public education. We had an increase in funding of $17 million, which included $14 million for the Schenectady schools, and about $1.5 million for each of the big three suburban schools, South Colonie, North Colonie, and Niskayuna. We have two major transportation projects that the state is funding in the 110th. One, which is very important to my constituents in Colonie, will be to take the traffic off the intersection of Albany, Shaker, and Wolf Roads and go directly into Albany Airport. That'll alleviate a lot of congestion in that area. Also,
how has that happened?
There's a design to go the other way. Basically.
As opposed to exit 3, which...
Exit 4.
Exit 4.
Right, but exit 3 was to be built, and it was supposed to go to the airport.
Well, it is, whatever it is,
right.
I think it's 4, but
this is not...
whatever it is, it's going to the airport.
But not an exit off the Northway?
Yes.
Oh, it's an exit off the Northway?
It's an exit off the Northway, so if you want to go to Albany Airport, you're going to be able to go direct and not go on to Wolf Road and then on to Albany Shaker.
Yeah,
that's
it takes about 5 minutes over here.
That's a big
So
bottleneck.
we never heard of that before. This is
no, this has been pending for some time.
Mark, over here, you're the newsman.
It hasn't been...
Well, it's committed now,
It's
and
committed. How much is that?
The actual spending amount?
Yeah.
My recollection was in the neighborhood of $60 million, $55, $60 million, but you can get those figures
But how much
on the DOT website.
And how much is it for federal funds? Because the Northway is a federal road and the airport's federal.
I don't know how much is federal and how much is
But
state.
part of that 60 million will be
Most
federal?
likely, yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Makes my trip easier now. That's good. You got one good point on your report
Okay.
card for me.
So then
over
we
here.
also have
Continue.
the Rexford Bridge,
Yes.
which goes from next unit of Rexford, is being replaced. That's a big area of congestion because a lot of people come from that southern Saratoga County area to get to places like GE Global Research
So
in
who
Niskayuna.
represents the Rexford part of it?
That would be Jim Tedisco.
Okay. So did you have to work with him on getting that done, or?
Well, we're in the majority here,
I
Mark. You know that.
I know that. That's why I'm asking.
No, I didn't.
No,
Not on
okay,
that particular
okay,
one.
okay.
So, no, I mean, Jim and I have done stuff together. There is a bill that, we have a fund in New York called CHIPS,
Yeah.
which funds local highway improvement.
Right.
And I introduced a bill that would create funding for water and sewer improvement along the same lines, and Jim had been working on that, and he talked with the Republicans in the Senate and got them on board with my bill. So, yes, in that particular situation, yes, that that was one that I did work on
With him.
with Jim on.
Yeah,
So
because Jim doesn't have pride of authorship on his bills. I mean, not that he has to.
no,
but
and I don't either. I mean, a really excellent example, which is another thing that I think is important to talk about, is there were 3 heroin bills that passed this year. I was the lead sponsor and introducer of one of the 3 bills in the Assembly, which was my first opportunity to be a lead debater for the Democrats.
And you were impressive. I was there listening.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
And I have a little difference of opinion with some of my Democratic colleagues in the Assembly on the issue of heroin treatment. I'm a strong supporter of allowing family members to petition a court for involuntary treatment of heroin addicts, for example. That is not something that is supported in my conference. I worked with Senator Ord, a Buffalo Republican, and the governor's office on that bill, but we settled for some improvements in the way addicts are dealt with when they have an overdose in the hospital. We made it, there's no pre-approval process for getting them some of the necessary medication they need. There is medication today which can ease the withdrawal symptoms.
Right.
What you want to do is get people stable so they're thinking about treatment. Where I would differ from some of my colleagues, and I support the so-called involuntary option. I don't believe that with a drug like heroin, because of the physical compulsion to use, that people can be very particularly successful with about a 90-day period where they're free of heroin usage. So, but the legislation that we did pass allows people to get stabilized within a 72-hour period to get introduced to a potential treatment program, which hopefully they would elect voluntarily. So
that was the bill that you sponsored, that you
Yes.
were the lead on, but one of the other bills in the package was to limit the number of pills
that was
from 30 days to 7.
Now, I had an interesting involvement in that because John McDonald had a bill that limited the prescribing period to 5 days.
Wow, okay.
And I was a co-sponsor of John's bill, but in consultation with the medical society, we came to the conclusion that there would be situations where people who had surgery and so forth would not be able to get back to their physician in time within 5 days, and it was too cumbersome. So the medical society was advocating for 10 days, and ultimately there was a compromise reached at 7.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's an important bill. We've had many stories, unfortunately, of people who were introduced to large supplies of opioids when they were injured in some fashion, and unfortunately, after using up a 30-day supply, they found they resorted to illegal opioids such as heroin. So,
well, even if they didn't use up the 30-day supply, they sold what was left over.
that could happen too.
Yeah.
But I think it is. Let's face it. In this society today, there are certainly a number of physicians who hand out medication as if they're candy, and we need to step in and give a message that that's not what needs to be done. And so there's a lot of physicians, of course, the vast majority of physicians would not be in that category. However, I think we have to do everything that we can to stop the spread of this opioid problem.
I thought it was interesting that they had John McDonald, who's a pharmacist, to deliver the lead on that bill of limiting the number of pills.
Yeah, that got merged in with another bill, so I'm not sure. The other two bills were sponsored by Linda Rosenthal, who's chair of alcohol and substance abuse, and Michael Cusack from Staten Island. But I thought the bill that I had was one of the most important. It's certainly, the most important
Impactful.
statewide bill that I've had. I mean, I had another bill that I passed that has kind of an interesting history. It has to do with non-payment of wages by foreign corporations. Many years ago, when I handled a lawsuit, I learned a lot about the the beginning of corporations in the United States. And you used to have to, if you wanted to form a corporation, you had to petition Congress or the state legislature, and it was kind of a politicized process. And these corporate status was limited liability. Corporate status was only granted for, if you wanted to exploit a mine and the government decided you should be able to do that, they'd give you a corporate charter through the legislature. During the Jacksonian period, which was, they were trying to spread democracy through the land, it was agreed that everyone could form a corporation. Anyone who wanted to pursue a business activity could form a corporation and have the benefit of limited liability. But in New York, they were debating this at our Constitutional Convention in 1846, and it was decided that because of fear that people would use the corporate form to avoid paying their employees, the top 10 shareholders of privately held corporations formed in New York would be liable only for the unpaid wages. So we had a case that occurred up in Saratoga County where this company did business only in New York State, but they had incorporated in Delaware, and our court system ruled that since they were a foreign corporation, they couldn't be held liable for the unpaid wages of their employees, and there are substantial liabilities there. These folks purportedly sold their business to someone else, took the money, and didn't pay the workers. So we're able to get the law changed unanimously in both the Assembly and the Senate that this unique provision of New York law for the benefit of safeguarding wages of employees was passed and then signed into law by the governor.
He was already signed in. He didn't take his time signing this.
No, he signed that one, and
now you should explain to our audience why this company in New York was formed their corporation in Delaware.
You can.
And I know the answer.
Well, anybody can form a Delaware corporation. Delaware has encouraged, in order to get tax revenue, people to file corporate to get their certificate of incorporation in Delaware. Also, there's a rule of law. It's called the it's called the Internal Affairs Doctrine, where the internal affairs of corporations are governed by the law of the state of incorporation. So New York has a lot of protections for minority shareholders, more than, say, Delaware does. Right. And although there are cases in which New York has intervened even in non-New York corporations, but people think they're going to incorporate in Delaware and get the benefit of some more freedom that Delaware offers the way corporations operate.
But isn't it a tax thing where you don't have to pay tax?
It is a tax thing.
There's a
franchise tax, it's called, yeah.
Okay, the franchise, you don't have the franchise fee that you...
Well, New York doesn't get the fee if you incorporate in Delaware, they get the fee. But the benefit of going to Delaware is more the internal affairs doctrine, that you can get your corporation governed by the more liberal rules of Delaware than some of the more, I would say, public-spirited rules that we have in New York, like fairness to minority shareholders.
I see. Okay, all right. So continue on. You have a list there of things, of great things that you did during this session.
Well, I mean, we did a lot on, I was an original sponsor of the pension forfeiture bill when it was first introduced by Assemblyman David Buchwald. We were able to get that passed in a form that was the Assembly proposal that this is to forfeit pensions of elected officials or high state officers who
commit a felony.
Correct. Yeah. Now, it doesn't apply to some, low-level.
But this is also moving forward. There's no one's grandfathered in.
Well, there's a little, a lot of people say, when the Shelley Silver case came up, we had angry constituents saying, "Why can't you forfeit his pension?" The problem is a little law, there's this law called the United States Constitution, and it says you can't pass an ex post facto law. So the law has to be in effect before the time in order to do that. But as a practical matter, if former Speaker Silver has to pay restitution,
Right.
which he will, that money would come out of his pension anyway, so it would come back.
Also, it's interesting that the judge had him pay a fine that was equal to his pension. So
Same.
There you go. So it's not necessarily restitution, but
Right.
it's a special, it's a
But
fine.
that was under federal sentencing law. This would apply to all
To
state
right,
crimes
right,
as
right.
well.
I'm just saying. Okay.
Yeah, but the net effect was the same,
That's
so it's
right.
not as if he got to keep it.
That's right.
If, as you know, the Supreme
McConnell,
Court has
right.
been throwing monkey wrench into some of these things.
Yeah. So, as a student of the law, do you think?
Haven't looked into it.
Okay.
We've moved on with the new speaker.
Right. No. I just
You
was
know.
wondering out of curiosity.
I haven't looked at that.
Okay.
I served for 2 years under Speaker Silver. I do think that the opportunity to get a new speaker has created some possibilities for members that did not exist beforehand. So I think that's been a positive thing. And just also, frankly, I'm not a supporter of term limits on members, but I am a supporter of term limits on committee chairs and leadership.
Right.
And there's a real difference because you have a learning curve when you come into the body. It's unrealistic to expect someone in 8 years' time to master all aspects of New York legislation. But if you're going to become speaker,
Right.
or become a committee chair, you've already been there a very long time before you get to that position. You have your seniority list. I
That's
mean,
right.
you can look and
I'm
you
going
can
to look
probably
up Carl Hasty.
look up Carl Hasty.
Yes,
So
but
the
you
po-
continue. Go ahead.
So my point being is that if you can't, within 10 years' time, make your mark on the body, either as a committee chair or as a speaker, I think you've had enough of an opportunity. 10 years is a long time, and keeping in mind the fact that you probably had to serve 10 years just to get in that position.
Right.
So I do
so
think that,
He's number 16. Oh, he's been in office 16 years.
yeah, so by the time he
So-
had speaker, he already had 14 years of experience.
Right.
So it's not unreasonable to say
Right.
that
He's
maybe
number
we
30
should limit him to 10 years
He's
as
number
speaker.
38 on the seniority list.
Yeah, that shows how hard it is. I don't know
He-
where I am. I'm
You're,
down
you're 106.
somewhere out in the boondocks or
Yeah.
whatever of seniority.
Okay.
So that was something that we did accomplish. I was also a dissenter in the past session on 2 issues. I did vote against the governor's education budget in 2015, not in 2016, when he was on this relentless attack on public education, which people would ask me about that, and I would say, well, I don't agree with the governor, but that's not the point. My constituents don't agree with him, and even if I did, I really couldn't represent the district I represent and still support that type of
So
approach.
he was less relentless in 2016.
Very much
So you
so.
supported the
I did vote for the budget,
right.
and we had tremendous increase in education funding.
Now, Dov Hikind
Into-
voted against the budget because there was a lot of anti-Jewish sentiments in the.
Well, I think that I would disagree with that
Okay.
characterization. I would say that whether it's Catholic schools or Jewish schools or fundamentalist Christian schools, everybody wants to get access to state dollars. And the governor has supported that in certain respects. There's the so-called private school tax credit. Now, this needs to be explained to the public. It is not a tuition tax credit. It is not a tax credit for people that pay tuition to go to religious schools. That's not what it does. And what it does do is allow persons of extreme wealth to get a tax credit for giving money to foundations that support
Right.
private schools. So I would venture to say that most of those dollars are going to be people at the very top 1%, like hedge fund owners who are going to give money most likely to the foundation that supports their favorite prep school in Manhattan,
Yeah.
or their favorite boarding school somewhere in New England, and not really getting the money to the average yeshiva or the average parish Catholic school. But I'm not nor is my district a supporter of
Tuition tax credit.
of tuition tax credits. We already pay for transportation to private schools. We pay for, and we've increased the funding for special education in private schools. So we're already doing a lot in that area. And my position would be that until foundation aid, which is a formula that's designed to equalize the opportunities between wealthy and poor districts throughout the state of New York, until that's fully funded, I don't see how we can be giving money to private schools. Our first responsibility is public schools. I went to private school for 13 years.
But your children are going to, or went
Well,
to.
one child went to private and one went to public.
And which one turned out better? No.
No comment.
No comment, okay.
And you know what? That is always something that remains to be seen
Okay,
over time.
I'm just joking, okay. So this anti-BDS resolution or whatever that the governor signed, are you in favor of that? Did you like
I
that?
am not in favor of that. I voted for the resolution opposing BDS in the Assembly. But the idea that government cannot do business with people who support BDS is absolutely 110% unconstitutional. It's a violation of the First Amendment. The case law goes on for 100 years that government cannot distinguish between people because of their point of view and who gets government contracts. So I may be whatever my religious position is, whatever my political position is, I could be, we don't administer tests to people to determine what their views are on racial equality when we decide to give that when they bid for government construction jobs. So it's the same thing here.
MWBE.
MWBE is a affirmative action program.
Well, say what you want, but you're Jewish and you're pro-Israel.
I am a member of J Street, so the position of J Street is pro-peace, pro-Israel.
Pro-Israel, okay.
That doesn't mean that I agree with the policies of the Netanyahu government. One of the things about having a state of Israel is we're supposed to have a state like everybody else. And I have to hold the state of Israel to the same standards that I would hold my own country to. And so that means I, on occasion, do disagree. I don't make a big deal out of it. It's mostly private. I'm not engaged in criticizing the government of Israel, but I believe that all people should be free to do that. And I don't think if you criticize the government of Israel for things that they do, that makes you anti-Semitic. And I don't think that that should deny you the opportunity to bid on government contracts. That doesn't mean that there aren't some people who criticize Israel because they're anti-Semitic, but the two cannot be equated.
But there's an anti-BDS movement going on, or
I think that's too many negatives.
So, or you could say a pro-BDS movement going on. Because
Well, I don't agree with BDS. I've told the BDS folks that I feel under present circumstances that more is to be gained by encouraging dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians and doing everything that we can to promote that. I don't think BDS does that. So I do not support the BDS movement. On the other hand, I defend the right of the BDS movement to have their point of view and to speak. And that I do First Amendment practice. As a private attorney, and it would be very inconsistent of me to say that my client should have free speech, but the people who
Look,
support
it's
BDS
the same
should not.
argument of the Nazis marching in Skokie, Illinois. You know,
Well-
you don't agree with them marching, but they should, you know, but you say.
The
you
question
know,
of Nazis gets somewhat more complicated.
But it's freedom
but
of speech. And
It
freedom of
is, but we
expression.
used to have a law called group libel in the United States, which was declared unconstitutional by
yeah.
the Supreme Court.
Right.
It gets complicated when you're dealing with certain criminal organizations that promote violence,
Yeah,
and
but you're
one
not
could
but
argue
you're not screaming fire in a movie theater
That's-
when the Nazis are
that's the
marching
classic-
in Skokie.
that's the classic First Amendment argument.
Thank
It
you.
is. It
And I
is.
didn't go to law school. Okay.
Well, it's
There
a
you-
common sense
Yes.
thing, and but at this point in time, I think that
That's what it is.
the First Amendment, as it's currently interpreted in the United States, we can't say that the BDS movement should not have free speech.
Okay, so you have more on your list there, or do you want me to take over and ask you questions that I, you know?
Whatever questions you want to ask me,
Okay.
go ahead.
You have a bill that, zombie homes, about zombie
Okay, well, we
homes.
passed the.
Oh, you didn't, were you
I may have
sponsored?
been a co-sponsor,
Okay.
I'm sure I was, but the idea behind that is to require the banks, when a home is abandoned,
Yeah,
the banks have to upkeep, maintain that home,
upkeep, yeah.
but in exchange for doing so, they get a more rapid foreclosure process.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something that we did pass, and it had the support of the governor, and so I think that was a major step forward.
and what's this law about honoring military service of New York State employees?
Okay, so what happened was that New York has always given pension credits for people's time in the military, but only combat veterans got
Right,
that.
right.
This extended it to non-combat veterans as well.
Oh, really, non-combat veterans?
Yes, that's true.
So,
So if you served in the military and you happened to be in,
Fort Dix, New Jersey, yeah, okay.
right,
Then you could still get, okay.
right, that's correct.
Not that I was in the military either. I didn't do very much. No, anyway, you have a bill that authorized municipalities to join a county self-funded or self.
That's one of my favorite bills, and I'm pressing very hard to try and get that passed, so far without success.
I didn't know.
The
Before I brought it
idea,
up.
well, Albany
Okay.
County, Schenectady County, meant 24 of our counties are self-insured for health insurance, and
Right.
self-insured health plans provide the best benefits at the lowest cost. So if you live in a municipality that's not big enough to self-insure, you could join the county plan. It would help the taxpayers by keeping the cost of health insurance down and help the employees. They'd pay less in their own premium, their own share of the premiums, and they'd get better benefits.
And what's this bill about relating to eliminating a disincentive for whistleblowers?
We have in New York one of the weakest whistleblower laws in the nation. The way it's been interpreted by the courts, and I think quite disgracefully so, is that if you're a whistleblower, you are only protected if there is actual harm to the public at large. So the classic case would be someone poisoning the water supply. But if you engage in whistleblower activity and that prevents harm, you're not protected. So I think that's a shockingly bad construction of the law by the courts, and we're trying to get that corrected.
I see. And how are you, in what way are you trying to get it corrected? What are you
It's a
trying to-
change in the language of the law, so it could include a variety of different activities, like whistleblowing on financial matters, which is not covered now, corruption in the business or what have you, or also that it would not have to have immediate harm to the public at large, that if the matter in question had the significant potential to harm the public, then that would be protected. I could give you a particular instance that where I represented an individual who was administering medical treatment and helped a patient, perhaps saved a patient's life, and yet because the patient wasn't harmed, that person didn't qualify under the whistleblower law.
So let me ask you about this one last point. You're a partner with Cooper Irving
Yes.
Savage.
Yes.
Did you become partner recently?
No,
No,
I've been a
okay.
partner for a long time.
Do you, and you have several different practices that you specialize in?
Mostly civil rights
Right.
and employment law for employees and commercial litigation.
Is there, how I don't know, sensitive are you in terms of this whole thing with stepping over the line? I don't want to say ethics law.
Well, the
but
outside income
moving the
issue.
two- No, not the outside income issue, but seeing something in your practice and then saying, oh, wait a minute, we have to legislate for this because
Well,
this has been a problem. and-
I think in your practice as a lawyer, just like as John McDonald as a pharmacist, you see things all the time that need to be reformed. But it's not a direct benefit to a client of mine. That's a different sort of thing. But you have a general knowledge of the law, and it leads you to
Are you
reform.
walking more on eggshells now that
No,
everyone's looking
because
at everyone else?
no, not at all. Because in the
That's what I was trying to
our
get at.
practice doesn't involve anything that runs afoul of those prohibitions. I am allowed actually to sue the state of New York because a judge is deciding it who's a neutral. Could be a federal judge who,
Right.
or could be a judge who probably thinks because I'm an assemblyman I would be disfavored in the
That's
court.
right, yeah, that's right.
But the point
Yes.
is that we don't typically we haven't run into any conflicts. The one thing we strictly observe is if you call my assembly office with a legal problem, even if it's one that I could handle, we are not going to refer it to our law firm. We might give a recommendation of some lawyer that we know in the community who practices in that field, but we don't use the assembly office in any way, shape,
Right.
or form to generate any business for
Yeah,
the
I
law
was just
firm.
wondering about how, you know, sensitive this issue is. You know, when you have.
I think
do you-
it's-
have you gone to an ethics committee or commission?
Oh,
whatever they
we've
call
had
about,
plenty of ethics
where you-
training.
Where you can ask them for their opinion on
Yeah,
something?
we
Have you
did. When I
personally done
first,
that?
yes, when we first got to the assembly and I didn't know all the rules, I wanted to find out if I could still represent clients in discrimination cases in front of the New York State Division of Human Rights, for example. Or we had a lawsuit which was a race discrimination retaliation case against a state university, and I learned that those are permitted because, again, it's decided by a neutral.
Right.
What I can't do as an assemblyman is try to intervene with a state agency to help a client of mine.
Right.
That's prohibited. We don't do that.
All right, but, so you're fine, so, you know, you now are up to speed on all the ethics stuff, so.
Absolutely.
Do you go
yes.
to the ethics commission or committee?
There's
Separate committee?
there is a
Which
ethics
one?
commission, and sometimes I might ask them
But do you, so.
for an opinion as to whether I have a conflict of interest on something or not.
So you'd rather go to the commission than the Assembly Ethics Committee?
No, the ethics committee of the assembly is different. There's a
Okay.
joint legislative ethics commission.
Okay.
That's where you get your
And
opinions.
there's J-COPE also?
J-COPE is
It's
a
totally
different, it's
different,
totally
right.
different. We don't
You-
get opinions from J-COPE.
No, okay, you go to this joint
Yeah,
legislative commission,
the
okay.
Assembly Ethics Committee is for ethics problems that members have run into, but if I want an opinion,
Right.
I go to the Joint Legislative Ethics Commission.
Okay.
Mark,
thank
we're
you.
having a good time, but we're out of time. Phil, thanks for coming again and giving us a good report card for what you're doing in the New York State Assembly. And keep on going with good success, and we'll ask you back for another year for another report card.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. There's a lot of great topics there I wish we could talk about in greater detail.
All right,
Thank you.
continued success, Phil.
Thank you.